Welcome to Business Stories. I'm your host, Jeremy Arnon. Today's special guest from Lerer Hippeau, partner Joe Medved. I think that worked, Joe.
I think it did.
Joe, thanks for joining. Thanks for being the inaugural guest on the first ever Business Stories show.
Thank you. I'm honored.
Looks like you are in the sky. I'm not really sure if you're in a skyscraper or just one of those virtual backgrounds, but it looks great.
No, I keep telling people New York City rents have dropped, so I've really upgraded our apartment.
It looks fabulous. Well, a little quick housekeeping for everyone who's watching. This is Business Stories where there's no BS. It is all about the why, not the what. And so there's no fluffy business speak on this show. We want to get to know our guests as people. So we're going to be diving deep with Joe Medved today and learning more about him and the reasons that he does what he does, not just what he does. So we have a massive audience here, Joe. Actually, to be honest, I don't know how many people are watching, but I know that my daughters are going to watch, mainly to make fun of me. So
okay.
With that, let's jump in. Joe, tell us a little bit about yourself for people who might not know who you are or what you do, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper.
Sure. So again, my name is Joe Medved. I work with Lerer Hippeau. We're one of the most active early stage investors in the country. We're all based out of New York City, and we've got 250 active portfolio companies. I've been in venture capital for over 15 years now, and I love working with early stage founders. Love what I do for a living. I'd do it for free if I could, but I can't because I live in New York City. But anyway, so love the role. Yeah, no kidding. But so I love being a venture capitalist.
So you had an interesting, in today's world, an interesting start in the VC world. I know you started from the banking world. You were not a founder of a company. I know a lot of times people come in from the entrepreneurial side of things. Can you tell us about how you got started from the banking world, and is that something that is still happening today?
Yeah. So ironically, actually, I was encouraged to be an investment banker by my uncle, who was an entrepreneur, and I think he encouraged me to do it because he was shocked with the amount of fees that he always had to pay bankers in any of the deals he was involved in, and he said if he'd come back in another life, he'd be a banker. So I did that for about 5 years, and I went through kind of the Web 1.0 boom and crash. And when I came out of my 5th year in banking, I'd started working with some earlier stage businesses and just had so much more fun talking strategy, working with these teams much more closely than a lot of the financial engineering we did with the larger transactions, which you can make plenty of money doing, but I just didn't find it as fulfilling or intellectually stimulating. And so I transitioned into VC. And at the time, it was a fairly common path into venture, right? When people still had to raise millions of dollars to buy their own servers, like junior VCs were more often people with a background like mine, where I'd been trained in building, very detailed spreadsheets. But that's changed pretty dramatically in today's world. Like people more often have a product background, biz dev, maybe they founded a company or something like that, because the role has really evolved for an entry-level venture capitalist.
So if someone who might be watching, who might be early in their career that wants to get into VC, but maybe isn't interested in becoming a founder or isn't a product person, is there still a way for them to get into the space?
Yeah, you can still, there still are people who have been in the banking world, but generally, and this is going to vary by fund, but like we're focused at seed, right? So we're writing $1 million+ checks in a $2 to $3 million round where there's like an alpha or beta product that we can test out. And the way we're sourcing and diligencing those deals is much more around the people, right? Like, when I was in investment banking, we were working on transactions where, 95% of the decision was based on metrics, right? That were established often for many years. On the early stage venture side, it's much more about people and individuals. So the roles that work and get you in there are often the type where you are naturally engaging with a lot of other people ideally in the startup community, or potentially in a world that will have a lot of vendors that are startups, so that you have enough touch points in the ecosystem to help not only identify potentially interesting startups and founders, but get access to them, and have the ability to truly understand what they're building and diligence the potential, product and kind of industry vision with stakeholders in that space.
So when you started, and the shift of VCs becoming more former founders, did you ever face any friction from folks that felt like maybe you didn't have as much startup credibility, or did you ever run into any pushback?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I was very cognizant of it. I mean, even today, I still feel like I'm apologetic for never having really owned a P&L, right? I mean, I haven't had to hit a budget like you have, right? I think, and it's particularly challenging, I think, for entry-level VCs if they don't have that background, because you'll have, naturally, like you're someone who's helping control the deployment of millions of dollars. So you're going to have some founders that are going to come up to you, particularly those that are a little bit newer, maybe naive, that are going to talk to you like you know what the heck you're doing. And when you start as a VC, like I didn't have a clue what I was doing, right? I mean, it took me many years to learn sort of what makes a good investor and how you can be most supportive to your companies. And honestly, a lot of what I learned was from the founders themselves, right? So I think I like to believe I have empathy, and I'd like to believe I'm reasonably humble. I don't know if anyone who's humble would actually say that, but I like to believe that I am. And what I tried to do is really sort of look at the world through their eyes and see where I could truly be helpful, right? So some of the earlier stage businesses I worked with, like I wasn't going to know what the product vision should be from my own mind, but I could connect with other stakeholders in the industry, make introductions to potential customers and clients, help with other recruits, things of that nature. So I tried to become an expert in certain areas like ad tech, and I think you and I connected through some events in that world, getting to know a lot of people in that ecosystem so that I could help make those introductions. Like I wasn't going to tell someone what your product roadmap should be, but if I could help introduce you to 2 or 3 potential customers, you as a founder, even if you're 20 years older than me, are going to be very appreciative of that input.
Did you ever think about moving to the operator side? And I don't know, why do they call it an operator? It's such a ridiculous.
Yeah, no,
Everyone's on that side.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of a silly name for it. But I definitely did. But I think like if you look at my career progression, so it was like 5 years in banking. I got into venture. And what I did instead, like and maybe it's just like venture was such a breath of fresh air for me personally relative to what I've been doing in banking. I really didn't want to ever leave the space because I loved what I did. Maybe I'm just a little ADD, but I loved meeting with all kinds of different founders every day, trying to change the world in all these different industries. My personality, I think, was less suited to focus on one individual company. But what I did do as a younger VC, and a lot of people will do this, is I tried to pick out 1 or 2 companies and very actively support those businesses. It primarily around things like business development, partnership, and things of that nature. So I could spend a day or 2 a week in a specific segment, really helping with some of the operational components of the business. But I won't begin to pretend that that's anything akin to, kind of betting your life on one company for 7 to 10 years and helping scale it up over time.
Mm-hmm. Let's switch gears a little bit. We know that women, Blacks, other minorities don't get funded at the same rate that white founders do. And at the same time, pattern recognition is something that's kind of valued in the VC world, or at least it has been. But at its core, at least the way I view it, pattern recognition is really unconscious bias. So what are you guys doing, you personally, and then Lerer Hippeau as a company, to kind of weed out unconscious bias and try to level the playing field a little bit more?
Yeah, I really think most of the industry is sort of transitioning this way as well. Like we're all making a more conscious effort to try and look a bit outside the bounds of what our like traditional, kind of filters had been for finding deals. And I think, look, at its core, venture is about finding people who can disrupt massive industries, right? Who are looking at things in unique ways. And that really should lead you to wanting to find more diverse founders, right? People who are from outside the mainstream walk of life that are dealing with issues that they really understand better than some traditional kind of corporate player. And so I think it's as much how you filter your network as it is pattern recognition. Because I think if you're smart about pattern recognition over time, you can understand that it is people that have a different perspective on an industry that are more likely to drive change. Sometimes they're almost naive about, believing what, because if you've been in an industry for 10 or 15 years, like, it's always been done this way, it should be, right? But I think one of the things that we recognized over time, and I think this is the case with a lot of venture funds, is that the vast majority of opportunities that we source, the founders we meet, come from our existing networks, right? So that's either the network of people you've already invested in, co-investors you've worked with before, sometimes it's the school you went to and who's from that community. That definitely is something that that causes unconscious bias, right? Because you're, like, as a VC, like, we make 20 to 25 investments a year. We probably see 2,000 or 3,000 companies, right? And you can't efficiently operate as an investor unless you set up some kind of filters, right? Like, you could spend all day talking to people. Like, you have to set up some level of filter to try to identify the best opportunities. And what that typically would be is, like, we want to find someone. If you can't get a warm intro to our fund, the question is, well, then how are you going to get a warm intro to a customer, right? Or a potential recruit? And so that's often a big threshold for meeting with people. But what we've realized over time, and we've gotten this from starting to work with more and more diverse investors, and that can be whether it's female, and our team now is probably a third female, which has been wildly beneficial to our group, but also trying to work particularly around more recent events with more African-American founders and Latino founders and investors as well. And I have one colleague who's Latino as well, and he's tried to build up a lot more activity in that community, but figuring out how we can connect with more of the nodes in that network so that we're not unconsciously just kind of filtering out all the opportunities in that space. So we are now more likely to meet with the founder who can't come in through a warm lead if they have a diverse background, just recognizing that we've just severely underserved that portion of the founder population. And I won't claim that we're unique in doing that. I think most funds recognize this and recognize that even the economic opportunity when you're willing to consider more diverse founders. So I think it's improving, and we've done fairly well, particularly in terms of, we get put on a lot of lists for being one of the most active backers of female-founded startups, as an example. But even on a percentage basis,
you guys invested in Lerer, right? Lerer was
Lerer,
by
which has been sold to a phenomenal founder. Yeah, there was a phenomenal exit within just a couple years. And there's an example of someone who really understood her audience in a way that a male founder would not, right? And so you're foolish not to consider all forms of investors. But, like, despite even that great success, if you look on a numbers basis, we're still severely underserving even the female founder population. So we're looking to do more there, as well as diverse founders broadly.
So let's talk about the impact of COVID, because
Sure.
I think startups have been impacted very heavily, and I don't know if you guys have looked at spaces in the future that might be sort of areas of opportunity that you hadn't thought about before, or maybe have accelerated. Any areas that you guys were looking at before that you're not now, or weren't looking at before that you are, based on some of the things that have happened this year?
Yeah, we've had a lot of common issues that a number of funds have seen is that, a lot of things around retail obviously have changed dramatically, right? And we've had some exposure to that, but I think, the segments where luckily we had been spending more time and certainly are increasingly focused are things like health and wellness in the home, right? Mm-hmm. So Mirror being a fantastic example of that. That's a company that, likely would have raised a large growth round this year, but with COVID and people shifting their fitness to in the home, that company very quickly became profitable. And Lululemon, which was a retailer who had exposure to the same audience and didn't have those people walking in their door any longer, realized how valuable it was to have that connectivity in the home through a health and wellness system. And so we're certainly...
do you think they may have sold too fast? Peloton's a $25 billion market cap company right now. They sold for $500 million.
Yeah, look, this is always a question with an opportunity like this. So Mirror is a company that was founded, not more than like 3 or 4 years ago, right? It's very young. And like, these are the kinds of companies like you hear about. It's very rare for any company to have this level of success so quickly. You had an amazing founder with a great product. Obviously, the tailwinds of COVID helped. And you're right. This is absolutely a business that on a standalone basis could be much larger, within just a few years. But I think as investors, in part, you really have to be supportive of sort of the founder's vision for what makes most sense for the business. and determine kind of when is the right time to sell. I think on a standalone basis, honestly, I could see Mirror being even larger than Peloton. If you look at some of their early engagement metrics relative to Peloton, and to be clear, Peloton paved the way in this industry, but Mirror, arguably has a larger addressable market. It's a device that can more easily blend into the home or commercial spaces like hotels in a way a Peloton bike cannot. So it could be a mammoth business, but it effectively, there was a proposal given by Lululemon, was just, it was that offer you couldn't refuse. And, the founder felt it was the right place for the business over the long term for her to scale it. And I don't think there's a single investor in that company that would tell you they were disappointed with the outcome of that business. And so it was just deemed, that it was right to, kind of make the sale at that point. But we were thrilled to be involved in that business. And so like I said, we're looking at more opportunities in that space. I think telehealth naturally is something everyone's excited about. We've made a number of bets in that segment that are doing very well. But I think, the areas that a lot of people are not talking about where we're starting to see more rapid change, it's often even in these even more archaic industries that traditionally have not been digital, that are, facing this world where digital transformation has to be accelerated far more rapidly than they ever anticipated, right? You think about we have a company called AutoFi, which provides financing for dealerships online, right? And I don't know, maybe like 10 or 15% of dealerships to date have had online financing options. Well, overnight, you're in a position where all of them are like, oh my God, I have to be able to provide this solution for my consumer online, right? And so I think you're going to see adoption in that industry that's going to be years ahead of what was anticipated previously, right? And obviously with the transition to work from home, there's just so many solutions that more archaic industries are going to have to be open to leveraging technology in ways they never did before. And in part, it's just because people that were a little more tech phobic are now all becoming accustomed to conversations like these online. And it's, whether you're doing it with your family or at work, you realize the conveniences of, these types of solutions and how in many ways it's a no-brainer to adopt this stuff sooner. So it's reducing some of the friction for adoption of these types of technologies.
Mm-hmm. What's a tool that you rely on at work to keep you organized or just to be more productive? And what are some tools that you would recommend to entrepreneurs for their businesses?
Yeah, I think so. So for me, and it's a little like what I do on a daily basis, obviously, is, like I said, a bit different than entrepreneurs. But, we as VCs, I'm on a dozen plus boards, and I help, support many dozens more companies. So our days can be rather frenetic. We're dealing with so many different people, and particularly if you're spending time meeting with a lot of new companies, it's fairly chaotic. And so much of our communication is on email. And you can just you can drown in email communications over time. And I think over the years, I've tried to figure out a way to be more efficient with my communication, try to avoid being distracted. And I for many, many years, I've used a tool called SaneBox, which does help with email insanity.
SaneBox?
SaneBox, it was an individual guy. I don't think he ever raised venture money, ran it on his own. And effectively just allowed you, did a much better job than traditional Gmail at helping you make, the most important emails in your life rise to the top, whether it's like family, or for me, it's family, my colleagues at Lerer Hippeau, or all the portfolio founders that I work with. It surfaces those first, and then it helps you very easily kind of provide reminders to follow up on things. And I've recently added to that Superhuman, which has become a very popular email tool that just has a bunch of kind of kind of keyboard shortcuts, just to help you kind of archive and resurface almost your to-do list via email over time. And it's become critical for me because otherwise I just can't kind of stay on top of things. Look, as a founder, depends on what type of a business you have. If you have the pleasure of a role where you're not constantly stuck in email, or maybe you're working in Slack and things of that nature, those tools probably wouldn't be as valuable. But I think from a business perspective, it's a critical tool for me.
I think you showed me something a couple of years ago that back when people were trading business cards, it was a great tool that LinkedIn wound up buying. I think they shut it down, but it was card match or something.
I'm
Card
trying
lunch?
to even remember the
Card
name.
lunch?
Card Munch.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would take an image of the card and it would automatically like upload the information and you could connect on LinkedIn. It was super valuable. Certainly from a networking perspective. I mean, I still to this day, like every time I meet with someone new that I want to make sure I remain connected with, I establish that connection on LinkedIn. Although I can't remember the last time someone gave me a card from the startup world nowadays anyway. But like those kinds, I mean, I still use LinkedIn. LinkedIn is still one of those valuable tools for me. I think that, don't tell them, but they should charge me a lot more money for the amount of value that I get out of that platform. It's wildly valuable for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to close it out with, I don't know if you've ever I've seen this on some shows. They call it kind of like the speed round or the hot corner. I got to come up with a better name for mine. I'll just use.
You're a sports guy. You should have something good. Yeah, hot seat.
I'm gonna give you a bunch of names or a bunch of sayings, and I just want to know the first thought. So whatever comes to your mind.
Sure.
So, Steve Jobs.
Visionary.
Virtual reality.
Once overvalued, now undervalued.
How far away do you think it is? I know I'm veering off of the.
Yeah, I think it's still, it depends on how rapidly the cost of having VR devices in the home drops, right? But like today, like it reminds me, there are like, we used to go, I mean, when you and I probably, used to go to arcades when we were kids, right? And then all of a sudden consoles were everywhere, right? Because they became so much cheaper, right? You could have all those games in one arcade in your home in one box. Like today, there are VR arcades, right? Where you can go because it's so expensive to purchase, like, not just like a Vive or an Oculus, but like the device that it runs on, particularly for high-end games. But I would think, and I don't know hardware well enough, but I would think within 3 to 5 years, those devices will be so inexpensive and prolific that it will be far more heavily utilized. And I think you'll see it first in the enterprise, but I think in the home with gaming, like we have the Vive at home, and my son loves it. He's a gamer, but he barely uses it because not enough people are building games on it. But it'll get there over time. Yeah.
All right, we'll get back to my speed.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That was my fault. Telehealth.
What's that?
Telehealth. You mentioned it earlier.
Oh yeah, future of medicine. I mean, we're in Doctors on Demand. We're in K-Health, which is a doctor in your pocket. We're in Talkspace, which is mental health online. I mean, it's like you talk to any physician nowadays. I mean, it's a no-brainer that so much of the initial triage, in particular, should be done, just over online through text, visuals. Just dramatically reduces the cost of care and democratizes access to care. Particularly if you look outside of even the U.S. I mean, what some of our companies are doing internationally to help provide access to intelligence from physicians, through apps and online, I just think is going to change the world of medicine.
Dr. Fauci.
Dr. Fauci. I love Dr. Fauci. I know Dr. Fauci for president. I mean, I think he's, I shouldn't get political, but like, I think he's just someone who is like, Dr. Fauci would be a great board member, right? Because I think if you think about the startup landscape, it's wildly hectic, crazy ups and downs. And I think as an investor, like it's your job not to be the one that's like screaming fire, but like helping console the founders who are dealing directly on the front lines with a lot of pain, with a lot of sort of calm, kind of efficient analysis of how they should kind of go about with their business. And a Dr. Fauci, like he doesn't force you to do something. He gives you strong guidance and lets you make those decisions. But like he's very level-headed, right? He doesn't freak out the way some investors often do and should not. Like it should be your job to help people navigate through a crisis as opposed to create.
Last one, binge watching suggestion. What are you watching these days that you'd recommend?
This is one of those questions that I really don't watch enough TV. I would probably say Hard Knocks. I love Hard Knocks. If you like football, it's just like, it's such an interesting perspective into, it's not quite like entrepreneurs, but like it's people who like seeing that guy who was an undrafted free agent, like desperately trying to make the team. And like, it's like seeing a founder who's from the outskirts that somehow ends up doing something amazing. I just always kind of love those types of stories. So I think it's great television.
There's a couple shows that are very sort of 80s style right now. Were you a Karate Kid fan? Cobra Kai.
Oh yes, I have seen Cobra Kai. I just watched the first episode like 2 or 3 days ago. I mean, the acting is horrendous, but like hearing them play,
which is why it's so good.
And like, I mean, it's a classic. I'm sure that it will become an addiction.
That's a good Netflix one, and then Amazon has Sneaky Pete, which is like 3 seasons in. Which, if you're into con men, it's a great one.
I know I should watch it. My wife is not as much into that. We usually watch like Marvelous Miss Maisel. We've been through all of those. But yeah, no, I need to get more time. Although now football season's back around, I have to prioritize my TV time with football.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Joe. This was great.
Sure.
Really appreciate you coming on. For anyone who is out there watching, we have a great list of future guests. So stay tuned for new announcements. But Joe, thank you so much for joining. We appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.